Hello students and welcome to today's JAMB class. Today's topic for government is still on the basic concepts of government, and we'll be looking at a number of concepts that we believe are very relevant for government students to understand for the JAMB examination. More recently, we looked at the concepts of political culture, political socialization, and then we looked at feudalism. We understood the concept of political culture and how that builds our political socialization. And then we looked at one of the first forms of political systems that we have, which is feudalism. So we're explaining what feudalism exactly was. We said it was a socio-political and economic system that was based on land ownership and, a system called serfs or slaves or vassals. We explained how dominant this particular system was and how most of the resources, especially in form of land, was possessed by feudal lords, and those lords dictated, the economic activities of the people that were within their own system. However, like we mentioned, this system was in medieval times, and as such, part of it was pretty much primitive, and the need for evolution was important. Which then brings us to today's first concept that we'll be looking at, which is communalism. So it's important that we understand communalism first before we evolve to the other socio-political and economic systems. So what is communalism? Communalism is a socio-political and economic arrangement in which landed properties and other natural resources are collectively owned, managed, and cooperatively harnessed by the community as a whole for the common good of all citizens. Now, it is quite similar to feudalism. However, in communalism, we're not preaching landowners, we're preaching community ownership and management of these landed properties as well as the natural resources, with this purpose of what? Ensuring that every member of the community is satisfied. So we said communalism was a system that was based on oneness and love, and that people usually live in groups as families and they share resources amongst each other. So to put that into writing, we said communalism, this can be defined as a social, political, and economic arrangement right? So we're talking social, political, and economic arrangement, which you can also say socio-political arrangements, in which landed property, that is land, and other natural resources are collectively owned. So they are collectively owned, managed, controlled, and cooperatively harnessed for the common good of all citizens. Now, the reason why I would emphasize on this definition without attempting to shorten or limit it is because there's another concept that is pretty similar to communalism, but it's literally just missing the A, right? And the L. Yeah, it's missing the A and the L. There's communalism and there's communism. And that's why we need to understand in-depthly what communalism is trying to talk about, because they are very similar, however, distinctively different. So, looking at this definition, we can highlight some very key points from this definition. One, it is obviously a socio-political and economic concept, right? It also involves landed property and natural resources, which are what? Collectively owned, controlled, managed, whatever word, cooperatively harnessed, common good of citizens. So these keywords point us in the direction of what, the founders or originators of this concept intended. Summarily, we can say that this concept is based on oneness and love. Right? It is based on oneness and love, where people live in subgroups, and those group structures are usually family units. And within those family units, they share resources among each other. That is what communalism is. It is an upgrade from feudalism. And when we look at the features, we'll see, some of the things that differentiates it from feudalism. So let's look at the features of communalism. See, from the word communal, right? When you talk of communal, like togetherness. Now, the first and major feature of communalism is the fact that there is a collective ownership of resources. Collective ownership of resources. Resources vary. When we talk of land, we could talk of sea, we could talk of trees, things that are naturally gifted to a particular community. We're saying that it is not in the possession of a particular feudal lord or anything. It is collectively owned by the people. Now, this main feature opens room for so many other features, such as the fact that in communalism, there is an opportunity. So we say there is an opportunity. There are various opportunities. So we're going to start with the first one. There is an opportunity to participate in self or community development. In community development. Here, we're saying that communalism creates opportunity for people to be involved, right, in developing the community that they represent or they are a part of. Because their opinions matter, their initiatives matter, they matter, right? So it gives room for people to participate in the development of their community and spur growth that can ensure that the community is able to what? Maximize their resources. In communalism, they operate a system of self-governance. They operate a system of self-governance. What are we trying to say here? In communalism, because the people manage, own, and control resources, right? It means that issues that are faced will also be generally addressed, and they will be generally raised and addressed by the people of that particular community. So we said issues are raised and addressed publicly. That's exactly what we are trying to talk about in communalism and the system of self-governance. Here, there's nothing about appointing a leader and making that leader represent the choices of a majority people and then trying to include the right of minority holders. No. Everyone is involved, so it appears as though the community is ruling itself. That is a feature of communalism. Another feature is that the citizens participate in decision making. As we already explained here, if individuals are able to participate in community development, they are also able to participate in the decisions of the community. It means that maybe if the community is deciding to maybe exchange a particular resources it is blessed with for a resource that they have not, the people have a say as to, the value that would be exchanged and things like that. So the decision making is usually vested in the citizens. Now, while this has numerous advantages, it has a demerit of what? Slowing down the decision-making process. Beyond collective ownership of other resources, we've said that this system encourages collective ownership of landed property. What this implies is that there is the elimination of feudal lords and serfs. There is the elimination of feudal lords and serfs because including the land is owned by the people as a whole. Because there is a collective ownership of resources and land, another feature of this system is that there is no room for exploitation. There is no room for exploitation. Recall that the order of the day in a typical feudal system is that the people are usually oppressed and exploited because they are slaves to those feudal lords and are expected to what? Do the bidding of those feudal lords. So now that individuals collectively own resources and are responsible for what affects them and can be involved in what affects the community as a whole, there is no room for oppression and exploitation. That is one of the benefits of communalism, and it is embedded in its core features. Also, in the spirit of collective ownership, there is a collective ownership of institutions. Collective ownerships or collective ownership of institutions. Here we're talking of social institutions, institutions for learning, and so on and so forth. All institutions within the state are collectively owned by the citizens of the state. In a communal system of government, right, small communities are the main unit of government. Remember, we said in this system, they are usually broken down into groups called family units. And those family units are small communities that represent the main unit of government that they have. In this system, it encourages strong relationship. It encourages strong relationship. Because there is a collective ownership and cooperative harnessing of resources, the people are expected to be their brother's keeper. Here, people no longer look for their interests because they know that if you look for your neighbor's interest or members of your unit's interest, you're also looking at your interest as well. So that also creates a strong relationship, a feeling of harmony amongst members of that state. To make this stand, we can also add the fact that communalism is usually common in village settings. So it's usually common in village settings. It is in villages that you can have small units that can properly apply this particular system of government. It is in fact unique to ensure that people have collective interest and ownership, be their brother's keeper, because naturally, human beings are what? Selfish, and they look at their own needs. Now we have looked at the features of communalism. Let's see the difference between communalism and feudalism. Let us look at the major differences between communalism and feudalism. We already explained or recapped what we defined feudalism as. In the last class, we said it's a socio-economic concept that is based on land ownership or landed property and serfs. So feudalism is that type of system, while communalism is basically a system that encourages collective ownership, control, management of what? Resources, as well as landed property, and cooperatively harness them for the good of people. So it means that there are some distinct features. One, the most important, there is no lordship. There is no lordship in communal system, while there are lords in feudalism. You can agree with me. We said in feudalism, we said that the unit head of a particular state is the one that possesses that state, and that person becomes a feudal lord. So in feudalism, we have system of lords. However, where there is community ownership, there is no lordship. So there is no lordship system in a communalist system of government. Here, also, land is a symbol of security in feudalism. I'll explain. Recall that we used to have series of wars and conquests in a feudal system of government because people are trying to acquire lands. It means that feudal lords and landowners feel threatened, in having to want to acquire more land just so they can secure their position as lord, or they can increase their economic power. However, in communalism, land is simply a means of economic benefit. So, while in communalism, land is a means of economic benefit. In communalism, the purpose of land is not usually to mark territory or determine who is a ruler, but rather to harness the resources that can be gotten out of those lands. It could be gold, it could be food, it could be crops, it could be anything that can be harvested or derived from the land. It could be trees that would grow and produce fruits, trees that can provide means for forestation, whatever it is, it was basically a means to an end. So land was usually not intended to be acquired in itself, but for what the land or the benefit that that land can provide for its owners, right? So in this case, we can also say that another major difference between feudalism and communalism is that land ownership was communally owned in the case of communalism, while in feudalism, it belongs to a lord. So, 3, land was communally owned in communalism, while it belonged to the lords in feudalism. Very basic stuff. For a communal state, land belongs to everyone. However, in feudalism, land belongs to the landlord or the landowner. Similarly, right, we've said that in feudalism, the system was based on conquest and subjugation. You see people being subjected to harsh economic conditions. You see wars and conquests going on in order to acquire territory. While in communalism, the system is based on peace and tranquility, right? That community ownership, the strong relationship that causes one to be their brother's keeper, those were the features of this particular system. So, we can say that feudalism is based on conquest and subjugation, while communalism is based on peace and tranquility. People are much calmer just because, as I mentioned, interests align. In a communal system of government, in a communal system of government, there was equality of social status. However, in feudalism, there was a segregation in class status. That is, in feudalism, we had the people that we knew as feudal lords, which were separate in person, in identity, and in class than the serfs or the slaves or the vassals or the peasants. They were in two separate social classes. However, in communalism, everyone is equal, right? There was no lord, there was no slave. So that's simply what we're trying to say here. So we can say in communalism, there is equality in social class or status, while feudalism consisted segregation in social class or status. So there was a segregation. It was clear who the rich was and it was clear who the poor was. Also, in feudalism, there was discrimination in income distribution. What are we trying to say? The slavers would work on the land and would have to pay some levies, some taxes as determined by the feudal lords. It means that income was not particularly distributed because the rich continued getting richer. The feudal lords kept on getting richer. While in a communal system of government where everyone owns each land, it means that people work to gain riches and wealth for themselves. And everyone had an equal opportunity or access to the resources of the land. So, we can say that in feudalism, there was discrimination in income distribution, while in communalism, there is equitable income distribution. Everyone had equal opportunity to access the same amount of resources to enrich themselves. Right? So, this part, this specific feature is one of the demerits that contributed to the oppression and dictatorship that existed within this system. And that's why we can safely say that there exists dictatorship in feudalism, but no room for dictatorship